Hi everyone, Elizabeth here. Hope all is well. I wanted to follow up a little bit on in regards to the last video that I did in regards to um, some of the fires and things. Like I've mentioned, friends and family in Cleveland mentioned that some parts of the city or suburbs smelled like burning plastic, and other parts of the city smelled like burning wood. There is a natural chemical reaction that happens when there is a fire, and obviously if there's things that are burning, such as homes, you're going to have a lot of different chemicals that are in that. But we have to understand that we are living through a form of time in history where we are in a paradigm shift, and that paradigm shift, that language has always been used spiritually, but we have to understand that we are entering a form or a part of humanity that is very technologically advanced. Oftentimes, the government and these corporations are generally 3 generations or so ahead technologically than what the public is. If you think about something simple as even like an iPhone, it's not like they just thought of this idea in 2003 and whipped it up by 2005. No, these are ideas that were in place 10, 20, decades before that thought was even there. I mean, technically, the tech industry is a replica of spirituality, and so they're pretty much just kind of copying and pasting this synthetic world in things that have already naturally been occurring spiritually through humanity for thousands of years. But why I want to do this video is that as I got more into dealing with vintage clothing and textiles, oftentimes I would get items and I would have zero clue what type of fabric or fiber I was dealing with. And one way to figure out what fabric or fiber that this piece of clothing or a textile is or has or contains is actually through a burn test. And so I didn't share this in my last video, but I do think some of this is important because things that are naturally created from the natural world, burn and smell differently than things that are synthetic and man-made. So they are very, very different. And oftentimes when you're looking at synthetic made items that are man-made fibers, these fibers oftentimes they produce black smoke. They don't always they don't always just burn like into ash. It kind of melts, and they oftentimes have a very nasty smell that would be a little bit similar to smelling like burning plastic or have a chemical smell. So it just doesn't smell natural. Most of your natural fibers, more of the highest vibration ones, I want to do a separate video on this, they generally produce a white or gray smoke. Some can even produce very little smoke, but it often smells a little bit like a campfire, burning paper. I mean, paper is wood, so there's a little bit of that. Sometimes things can smell like charred meat depending on the fiber, but that, grilled meat smell still has a little bit of a more natural scent. I mean, something that you would smell from a grill rather than something that you would smell from like a chemistry lab. Like, this is not right. So cotton, hemp, and linen are generally the highest prized fibers in the natural world. Once again, I want to do a separate video about talking about frequency and vibration here. But these are natural cellulose fibers. And so, like I said, they generally, when burned, they will produce a white or a gray smoke. It will smell a little bit like burning paper or burning wood, burning leaves, something that has that little more natural smell to it, like you would throw stuff in a campfire and smell it. And oftentimes these things will burn entirely, like burn into ash or just kind of disappear entirely. Now, when we're dealing with a more man-made cellulose fibers, things like rayon. It does have, the fumes can be slightly hazardous. That rayon itself does kind of smell a little bit more on that burning fiber because it is a cellulose fiber, but it is man-made. But when we are looking at more manufactured fibers, such as nylon, that's a synthetic fiber, acetate, that's a manufactured protein fiber. You have polyester, which is a synthetic polymer fiber. These oftentimes, here's what they do. They produce a black smoke. So that smoke is different. White and black, isn't that interesting? The polarity there. They don't really produce a lot of ash. It either kind of melts or it shrinks. You could still have, if you're holding, how you do a burn test is, you say you cut off a piece of fiber off of your clothes or whatever. Oftentimes the inside hem, especially in a lot of dresses, have excess fiber along a seam. So you can cut that out, hold it with tweezers, and then burn it. I mean, you can also just have a candle and kind of hold it up and just, you can see how it burns, the smoke, and if it melts or not. But when we're kind of looking at things like polyester, nylon, acetate, you're looking at the fumes are generally hazardous in general because it's a synthetic, man-made, chemical-based, like polyester is plastic, basically. So it is producing a hazardous smoke. The smoke is black and it often smells chemically, oftentimes, or just really nasty, just nothing that would smell like, you don't want to sit around a campfire and smell that. Something like acrylic is another synthetic fiber. This does also produce a black smoke, and the fume is also hazardous. So why is this important? It's important because we are in a time where people are now waking up that, and this has been a big waking up process for me. I've always thought that some things just happen naturally, like tornadoes and earthquakes and all this stuff. And what has been discovered since 2020, since that started to really snap people out, is that what we're dealing with is a system that is able to manufacture and produce things beyond our wildest dreams. And it does sound crazy, and I even feel crazy even saying it, but this is the reality that we have to look at. You can just type in on YouTube, like seed clouding. Now there's a whole other level of black magic that I haven't even discussed, which has been kind of discovered through this learning process. But what I'm trying to get at here is that because the government and corporations are way more technologically advanced than what the public generally realizes, is that we are entering a time where we are entering some form of end times, where the system is trying to engineer, produce, or manufacture its revelations. And so in order for that to happen with a bunch of fires and floods, it is going to be a combination of engineering this through technology, as well as the deeper, so that's the physical level, and then the spiritual level that's underneath it is, you're kind of looking at like weather witches and stuff like that, which is kind of like a deep, complex topic that I don't really want to get into. But understanding how simple smells of fibers work with the clothes and the blankets that you use and wear can generally help you understand when shit happens in your community. I mean, here's the thing. When there was the derailments and the explosion, that was an explosion of a bunch of various chemicals that were happening. So you're going to have probably a very hazardous, nasty smelling fume that is going into the air because of the combustion. But if we start to have forest fires, and these things are being led as this is just some naturally occurring thing because of the climate, but yet it's like, you're looking at all this black smoke and you're like, it smells like chemicals and plastic, then we have to start to think about what is happening and what is being engineered here. So some of this stuff, you know, these little things that happen in our own little microcosm can help us start to understand things in the bigger realm, because stuff that just starts smelling like chemicals and plastic is not natural, and it's not naturally occurring. Maybe in some areas of stuff it does happen, but it's oftentimes not necessarily the case. You know, something like wool actually does produce a black smoke. It might smell a little bit more like burned hair, burned feathers. It's not the greatest scent, but it's not a toxic chemical scent. It still has a little bit of that natural smell to it, because it's a animal. Well, it comes from an animal, but it is a protein fiber that is naturally evolved or occurred. What is actually really interesting is that your protein fibers, like silk is actually made, you know, from these byproducts of worms, and that can smell like burned meat and burned hair. So it's interesting because the fibers that we actually get from the animals does not, how do I explain it? It just doesn't smell as natural as the actual natural plant-based fibers. So I find that interesting, because when you start to understand the frequencies of fibers and textiles, it'll be really interesting. It's interesting to start connecting those dots. Like, are we actually really meant to be wearing silk, getting this byproduct from worms, silkworms, because, you know, the system wants you to be eating worms and bugs these days. So kind of interesting to think about. But yes, if things start smelling off, oftentimes you know that something in there is not naturally occurring. So I hope this helps connect some dots, and see you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.